So it's my pleasure to introduce now Professor Tony LaMontagne. Tony is a Professor of Work, Health and Wellbeing and a key collaborator for us with our UTas network. He's the Director for the Population Health Research Centre. He has a Doctor of Science from Harvard University, and we're lucky to have him in Australia. He's worked at University of Melbourne and now at Deakin University. He's pretty much a world expert on job stress, and the talk that he will be giving today is based on his integrated approach, which he will explain, but I know he's given versions of this talk all around the world and is sought after as a speaker on this topic. So a great friend as well, and thanks a lot, Tony.
Good morning. Thanks, Ange, and thanks for the invitation to come down and speak. Beautiful part of the world. As they say with Harvard degrees, the further away from Harvard you get, the more meaningful they are. So I think this is about as good as you can do coming here with that. My task this morning is to give you a quick tour of what we describe as the integrated or an integrated approach to workplace mental health. And this is just to acknowledge the members of my group who have been contributors to developing this approach, as well as Ange, Christy, and many others around Australia and around the world. So there's two key points I want to make to outline this talk. First, that mental health problems are prevalent in working populations, and second, that some of those are attributable to working conditions. So I think that leads us to the following approach. One, we need to protect mental health, and that's about our legislated and ethical mandate as employers. And we do that by reducing the negative or the risk factors for mental health problems. And the other, this part has been neglected historically, is to promote mental health by emphasizing and developing the positive aspects of work. And we can also promote non-work related protective factors in the workplace in sort of workplace health promotion programs. And then finally, regardless of cause, as mental health problems manifest in the workplace, we have to deal with them. We have to address them, we have to manage them. And that regardless of cause bit, we'll say more about as we get into it. This is just a visual representation of the same thing, and what it emphasizes is the different disciplinary bases of each of the threads of the integrated approach, as we put it. These have evolved to a large degree in isolation from each other. There have been crossovers historically, but to really make this work, we need to integrate those three threads. And which means crossing those various disciplines, which is kind of what Ange and Christy have been about in their network and what we're trying to do internationally as well. So onto that first premise, working in the working population, mental health problems are quite common. Point prevalence, that is at any point in time, what percent of people who are working might have a mental health problem. It's about 20%. And this is an estimate across the OECD as 35 countries, industrialized democracies around the world. About 15% are mild problems, and about 5% are serious, so major depression, generalized anxiety disorder, schizophrenia, things like that. That's a lot. And the interesting thing there is a lot of people function reasonably well with mental health problems. Now, what are the implications of this? For individuals, it's about discrimination, keeping your job. For organizations, most minds go immediately to productivity, turnover. At the societal level, the one form of disability pension category, that's growing is psychological disability. So we have challenges societally here as well, and we know that poor working conditions actually double your odds of leaving the workforce and going on to psychological disability pension. That's been shown in Europe. At the law and policy end, there's a complex nexus or crossroads of different legislative mandates that the conscientious manager has to deal with. There's OH&S law, labor law, anti-discrimination or equal opportunity. So that's something that people in workplaces need help disentangling. It's not always clear what the right thing is to do. And so that's something that we're working on as well. So now let's go to that second premise. What's the role of working conditions? What's the evidence that work has to do with mental health, both for better and worse? The positives of work, as we're all aware, is it gives us structure, it gives us income, gives us self-efficacy or self-identity, provides social connections outside our families and neighborhoods, outside our immediate networks. There's loads of positives about work. But that's particularly true for good work. It's also true, which we've shown empirically, that really poor quality work is worse for your mental health than unemployment. And those quality factors that are most important with respect to mental health in the workplace is this long list you see here. We can describe this as a psychosocial work environment or job stressors. There's a lot of different language that's used here, but the concepts I think will be familiar to many of you. Bullying, job control, how much say you have about the way you do your work, how secure you are in your work, whether you feel things are done fairly at your organization. All of these things we've been able to show are related to mental health, both predictively and when you look at them at the same point in time or cross-sectionally. So here's some of the outcomes that have been related to these stressors. Poor mental health is judged in many ways by scales that we use, the Kessler-6 and other measures you may have heard of, but also diagnosed depression, anxiety. Burnout is a common factor in workplaces, particularly amongst emotionally intense jobs such as social workers and so on. Suicide, the evidence around suicide and suicidal thoughts and behaviors is growing rapidly, linking these job stressors to excesses of suicide, particularly among men. You'll all probably be aware that 3/4 of suicides in Australia are male, and the relationship there between stressors and suicide is particularly strong in men, much less so in women. As an example of one pair of exposures and outcomes, or job strain and depression. Job strain is when you have high demands on your job but little control or little say over how to get that job done. And that's a particularly stressful situation, which almost doubles your odds of depression. And that's 11 high-quality studies were distilled down from hundreds around the world to reach that conclusion. So what this means also is that even if we have small increases in risk from exposure to poor security at work, bullying, or other things, if those exposures are common in the working population, that can translate to big burdens of illness. Historically, occupational health, we had concerns about exposures such as asbestos, which still is a concern, but we've come a long way in that space. But the thing about it, there's horrible risks associated with it, cancers and so on. However, it was not a common exposure in the population. Job strain I just talked about 15 or 20% of the working population is exposed to that. Women more than men, which is a reflection of the persisting imbalance in job control at work between men and women. So we've gone and made some estimates. As an epidemiologist, if you know how common an exposure is and how much it increases the risk of a given outcome, you can put those two things together and estimate the proportion of that outcome that's related to the exposure. Job strain accounts for about 15% of prevalent depression in working people. It's quite a chunk, and if we were to improve working conditions, we could make quite a dent in that. Some colleagues in France, using independent figures on exposure and risk, came up with comparable estimates. So this is not just an Australian phenomenon, but an international one. This is not to say, that's a quick tour of those first two premises that I outlined for you. It's not to say that we know everything we need to know in that space. There's loads of further questions which I won't go into here. But this is an active area of research that we're engaged in and trying to learn more as we go along. So let's turn now to that quick tour of the integrated approach, having covered the two premises I put forth at the beginning. So the first step in our mind is to meet your ethical and legal obligations by reducing the negative or protecting psychological health in the workplace. We know what to do with some, not certainty, but it's well established what to do, and that is to focus on working conditions themselves as well as making the individual better able to withstand the stressors. You've all heard of resilience, for instance. And then finally, to deal with illness as it manifests, and that includes the whole spectrum from recognizing illness to helping someone who's got a problem. Someone might go out on a claim or on an illness claim, whether it's work-related or not, and then there are return to work issues as well as compensation and treatment. So that covers that whole span of primary, secondary, and tertiary, which is represented here. Primary means going upstream to the source of the problem and controlling what you can as an employer, working conditions an employer has reasonable control over. Secondary means strengthening the individual so that they're better able to stand the stressors that they encounter. And tertiary means dealing with the outcomes as they arise. Those red bits along the bottom is to highlight that it's very multidisciplinary and there's lots of different types of people who contribute to dealing with this, both across society and sometimes even within organizations, particularly large organizations. Now the challenge here is that unlike where we have finger hazard from a saw machine or something, we can put a guard on that saw, and the fingers won't get cut off anymore. Simple solution, and one solution fits all. The challenge here with job stress is that how to go about achieving a reduction in job demands or better social support or more control. That varies for every person, every job, every set of, thanks Christy, every set of conditions. And so it requires tailoring or context dependence. There's a bit of work here for every workplace in doing this, but it is achievable. When we look at prevalent practice, how organizations deal with job stressors, it still tends to be riddled with issues such as stigma, which you've heard about, stigma about mental health, that is, people are unwilling to come forward and disclose, perhaps, or fear that they'll be discriminated against, but also stigma against job stress. Can't stand the heat, get out of the kitchen. So these sorts of things are persisting problems. The most common response when we ask organizations what they do is say, oh, we have an EAP. And that's fantastic. EAPs have great value. However, that doesn't deal with the upstream part of the problem, improving the quality of work, for instance. That's reactive and not preventive. You need both. So in summary, that's job stress prevention for you, and I won't go through these. Can I give the slides to folks? Do you distribute them? So I should have said that at the outset for those of you who are interested. So let's go into promoting the positive. This is the area that's the least well-defined. It focuses on well-being rather than illness. And the well-being definitions, in short, include two sorts of components, meaning and purpose, and also positive feelings and emotions. And complete mental health means flourishing or having high functioning and high positive emotions in the absence of mental illness. The overall aim with this is in the workplace to create or promote individuals who are flourishing as well as organizations that are flourishing. And instead of avoidance goals as in OHS or risk management, it's approach goals or aspirational goals that you're pursuing. And you might be after outcomes such as well-being or promoting challenge in the workplace for those who are up for it, engagement and other sorts of positive attributes. So here's a couple of examples of sorts of programs that people are trying in workplaces: developing workplace social capital, culture of respect, positive manager behavior. This is an area of ANGES, for instance. Here's the evidence that there can be some good from this, and that is based largely on the general literature, not a workplace literature on promoting the positive, but a large meta-analysis shows that you can get sustainable benefits for well-being, and in particular for people who aren't doing well in the first place. So it does promote well-being amongst those who are affected by mental health problems. Also, when you promote well-being, it's a buffer against stresses of work, which we've shown in a recent study led by Catherine Page. When you look within organizations, you go from about 50 studies down to about 15, but still the evidence is favorable that you can, in fact, enhance well-being in the workplace programs that have been tried. Finally, you can also use the workplace setting for promoting positive aspects of non-work related mental well-being, such as general mindfulness training that some of you in this audience may be doing in your workplaces now. So in short, to summarize promoting the positive, it's mostly been focused on the individual, but it's moving up to trying to learn how to do this for organizations. It's the least developed of the three threads, but there's great promise there. All right, and then to the final thread, which is managing illness, about in 2 minutes. Mostly what in the last 10 years, has been a huge explosion of mental health programs in the workplace. They've tended to focus on this side of things, which is quite important, and there was a gap there. But it's really focused largely on anti-stigma interventions and mental health literacy. So stigma is obviously negative attitudes towards mental illness or stress. And mental health literacy is having the knowledge, attitudes towards mental health, such as non-discrimination, and also being able to have the skills to have a conversation with someone you might have a concern about, and to promote help seeking even amongst yourself as an individual. Examples of this are Beyond Blue's workplace program, which some of you might have run in your workplaces, Are You OK Day, and you'll hear more about mental health first aid from Natalie later in the program. One key point here is that this has been really strongly embraced by employers, which is a fantastic thing. It also provides a new entree for job stress intervention because doors open for mental health literacy that traditionally haven't opened for job stress intervention. And one can start anywhere and work upstream. There is evidence of effectiveness here. That Martin is sitting right here. That's one of Angie's papers. She reviewed 22 studies and showed some small but positive effects of these interventions. And then there's other evidence as well. So in summary, this is managing illness is focused on the illness end. It's strong on tertiary, weak on addressing working conditions. There's little on promoting the positive, but it's strongly embraced by employers. So that's your quick tour of the integrated approach, and I'll just wave at the fact that we're trying to generate resources that help you, those interested organizations, with different programs. And this, you'll hear about this from one of our speakers. You'll hear about this from one of our speakers, and that's probably enough said. Time. I'll let you scroll through.
Cameron's going to say something now. Thank